Welcome to the 19th seminar of the International PhD in Progress Seminar Series, Phase 3, organized by the Global South Network. I would like to start this session by thanking Dr. Nauman Riayat, lecturer in law at Leicester Law School, who is also the founder and convener of the Global South Network, as well as the organizer of this series. The PhD in Progress series is now in phase 3, following the success of the previous 2 phases, which built a diverse and inclusive environment for PhD candidates to share their work. My name is Gozde Niaboglu. I'm a lecturer in film studies at the University of Leicester, where I teach European and world cinemas and film theory and philosophy. And my research interests include contemporary world cinema and the questions of work, migration and global politics. Today I am joined by my colleague Dr. Diane Levine, Associate Professor at the School of Criminology, University of Leicester. Diane's research expertise is focused on understanding the ways in which children and adolescents survive and thrive when life is challenging, particularly in a digital world, and in relation to addressing child abuse, neglect, maltreatment, and child protection. I'm also joined by Ruijue, who is a PhD candidate at the School of Law, University of Leicester. Ruijue's research interests focus on beneficiaries' right to payment under a letter of credit, with special reference to the law and practice with China and selected Anglo-American jurisdictions. And finally, I'm very pleased to introduce our guest speaker for today's session, Xiyuan Gao. Xiyuan is a PhD student in film studies at the School of Arts, Media and Communication at the University of Leicester. Today, Xiyuan will present their project titled Female Star Wars Fandom and the Social Merit of Substitution Creation. Xiyuan, you have around 35 minutes for the presentation, which will be followed by 5 minutes for comments and questions from the discussant and peer commentator. And following that, we will have 15 minutes for questions. Thanks, Xiyuan. Please, when you're ready.
Okay, thank you for you all for this great opportunity. Okay, let me share my slide. Okay, this is my slide. If there are any questions about my slide or my voice, please let me know. Thank you. Okay. Good afternoon, everybody. It is very nice to meet you here online. Today, I will give a presentation on my PhD project, which is Female Star Wars Fandom and the Social Merit of Substitution Creation. And spoilers alert, because I'm going to talk about all the Star Wars films in case there are someone who never seen Star Wars before. Okay, firstly, I'm going to introduce myself. I am Xiyuan Gao, a first-year PhD student in Department of Film Studies at the University of Leicester, under the supervision of Dr. David Christopher and Professor James Chapman. My research interests are fandom studies, science fiction film studies, cultural studies in Star Wars franchise, and feminist film studies. I also have an ongoing article about feminist narratives in Star Wars films. In today's presentation, I will introduce my PhD project with the theoretical background, the research gap and research questions, the methodology, and the primary finding, which is my new theory. Okay. There is a rough scholarship concerned with the Star Wars franchise as a cultural phenomenon from the arenas of cultural studies, film studies, fandom studies, and gender studies. My project will focus on Star Wars fanfiction, one of the typical supplemental narratives, and will be concerned primarily with artistic expression, spectatorship, online participation, and its cultural effects. Carl Silvio and Tony M. Vinci proposed that Star Wars is closely linked to myth because mythology allows us to experience our existence as significant in a universal or transhistorical sense. So my research will put Star Wars franchise and narrative as cultural products to evaluate the cultural phenomenon behind them. I argue that Star Wars and its narratives are a typical case of important cultural text for fans' lives and provide a unique spiritual experience, not just a series of films, which makes the franchise both mainstream and cult, but also epical. The very first Star Wars film, A New Hope, in 1977, featured three typical characters to the standard hero's journey as articulated by Joseph Campbell, from which the Star Wars creator George Lucas regularly reports he took his inspiration. The hero Luke Skywalker, a farm boy who lives on a desert planet and slowly discovers he has the ability of the Force and eventually allows him to become a Jedi Knight, the protector of the order in the galaxy. And the cowboy-type rogue smuggler Han Solo and the Princess Leia Organa, unconventional in her feminine representation with authority and confidence, unlike traditional princess figures. However, Silvio and Vinci also argue that Star Wars should not be viewed only from the perspective of mythology, but should move away from the myth, discover its essence through the phenomenon, see Star Wars as a cultural product, and conduct cultural studies from the perspective of history and culture. So my research will put the Star Wars franchise and narrative as cultural products to evaluate the cultural phenomenon behind them. Scholars like Diana Dominguez, Veronica A. Wilson, and Chris Clausen observe that across the three films of the original trilogy, the predominantly young male fanbase was primarily interested in the male characters' heroic development, such as Luke Skywalker's mythical hero's journey and Rogue Han Solo's redemption to altruism and justice. However, Dominguez, Wilson, and Clausen also argue that in unsurprising gender homophily, the audiences often like to pay more attention to characters of the same gender of themselves. Female spectators also noticed Princess Leia, who subverted the traditional conventions of melodramatic Hollywood princess character in many ways. In the two sequels of the original trilogy, The Empire Strikes Back and Return of the Jedi, Princess Leia continues to demonstrate strong leadership and fighting abilities, proving that women can also become heroes and have talents that are equally as heroic as male heroes while remaining their gender-specific. The prequel trilogy focuses on Luke's father, Anakin Skywalker, before he becomes the violent Darth Vader. Anakin Skywalker realizes his heroic journey that was necessarily tragic in its predetermined narrative arc towards imperial evil. However, his love interest and later spouse, Padme Amidala, mother to the heroic twins Luke and Leia of the original trilogy, was seen by many fans and scholars alike as a feminist failure compared with her screen daughter, Princess Leia. In Padme's first appearance, she emerged as a teenage queen with courage and wisdom beyond her age. However, throughout the three films of the prequel trilogy, once her romance with Anakin Skywalker develops, she is systematically reduced in her agency and autonomy, eventually subsumed by Anakin's narrative. At the end of the prequel trilogy, she becomes a woman who gives up her life because her husband Anakin betrays the Jedi Order and chooses the evil side. In the new millennium, with Disney's acquisition of Lucasfilm, various new female characters were introduced in the new Star Wars narratives, such as the much maligned Rey in the new so-called Skywalker saga, a scavenger girl who lives in a desert planet who gradually discovers her Force ability, and the narrative is set up such that the viewers accept that she will become the next generation of the Jedi Order. We could define her as the first female hero in the leading role who has Jedi power and will renew the male-dominated Jedi figure. Meanwhile, the leading female protagonist in the standalone spin-off film Rogue One, Jane also represents these surviving heroes who initially stray from the galaxy's wars before being recruited into its vicissitudes. Apart from Rey and Jane also in the leading roles, female protagonists like Rose Tico, Admiral Holdo, and Captain Phasma in the new trilogy, or Cara Dune, Bo-Katan Kryze, Fennec Shand, and Ahsoka Tano in streaming series, who variously also show their heroic status as strong women, significantly expand the scope of female characters in the Star Wars franchise. Although most of these female protagonists present interesting new feminist characteristics, have their way as female heroes, they still succumb by many traditionally masculine-dominated narrative conventions. The most iconic of this is the revelation that Rey is the Emperor Palpatine's granddaughter at the end of the new trilogy. Then she chooses the surname Skywalker for herself after defeating her grandfather Palpatine. Well, we can see that Rey as a representation of a future female Jedi, it is hard to ignore her remarkably similar path to Luke Skywalker about the trials and tribulations before ultimate success, and the cliché narrative, which is after rejecting the patronym Palpatine, she accepts another patriarchal family moniker in the name of Skywalker, which is more significantly attached to Luke and Anakin. Okay. While watching television shows and films, especially Star Wars, the lingering viewpoint of patriarchal centrality can make it difficult, or at least less welcoming for female spectators to find an identity that conforms to feminist values and equality and narrative centrality in an entertainment environment full of the male gaze, which argues that women are less able to enjoy films or TV series in the ways available to men because they are positioned as passive receivers of male discourse. However, female viewers have their own perspectives. Scholars such as Ian Ng conducted research on female audiences as early as 1980s. In her seminal analysis of American primetime soap opera Dallas, Ian Ng points out that there are many ways of enjoying Dallas based on various understandings of what Dallas is all about. Soap operas like Dallas give female viewers a different kind of pleasure than male viewers. However, according to Ng, due to the limitations of empirical realism and prevalence of paternalism in mass culture, it is hard to escape sexism and patriarchal values in criticizing women. Therefore, Ng observes that the opinions and pleasures of female viewers are disregarded and devalued. They are reduced to passive victims of the depictive messages of soap operas, and women's favorite content has a low status in mass culture. Ng, however, argues in contrast that the pleasures female viewers drive in their engagement with narratives, whether traditionally feminist in their content, is an emphasizing feminist behavior in and of itself. Okay. Similarly, there are various ways of enjoying Star Wars based on who is watching and what they prefer regarding the narrative outcomes and gender affiliations. There is a growing population of female fans, and with the rise of interactive internet social communities, there has been an explosion of female fan engagement in the context of Star Wars franchise. The history of fan activities in their popular mass citation and scholarship research can be traced back to 1988, when Henry Jenkins studied Star Trek fans, widely known as Trekkies. Jenkins foregrounds their most significant activity as the creation of fan fiction. Jenkins defines Trekkies and other fans in different fandoms as marginalized subculture groups who poach existing content and rewrite them into fan fictions of their own, then make these into fanzines, non-professional and non-official publication magazines, and share these with other fans for free. In Jenkins' later book, Textual Poachers, he examines television fans' poaching activities by analyzing gender, fan fiction, reader and writer relationships, fan music, and most importantly, fandom communities. Jenkins also offers an ethnographic account of a particular group of media fans, its social institutions and cultural practices, and its troubled relationship to the mass media and the consumer capitalism, means that he takes fan behavior to a societal level, analyzing this subcultural group from the perspective of media activity. Fundamentally, the creation of such material is motivated by their life experience living in a patriarchal society. Henry Jenkins believes that female fan writers choose the path of least resistance in creating fan fiction because they have been working under the patriarchal system organized by men for time. In instance, least resistance means that instead of creating literature from scratch, these female fans directly borrow existing characters and background stories and then use feminist ideas to modify or subvert the patriarchal underpinnings which characterize them. Science fiction narratives like Star Wars demonstrate an ethos of female power. However, this ethos is not always successful as it is overshadowed by masculinist depictions. This unsuccessful urges female fan writers to utilize fan fiction in Star Wars, which is independent of the mainstream narrative of Star Wars franchise, to re-examine how female identity is constructed and performed. Meanwhile, they enjoy female characters with feminine characteristics and behaviors that are not encouraged in a patriarchal ideology. Accordingly, I will define fanfiction as a feminist genre and analyze this perspective through the phenomenon that female fan writers break the boundaries of social ideologies and personal emotions. Moreover, with the emerging development of internet technologies, the engagement behaviors of viewers and fans have become more diverse when going digital. When it comes to fanworks, as the fandom moved into internet platformization, fanfiction moved away from the fanzine distribution model and became a digital text. At the same time, most previous fan studies provided by Camille Bacon-Smith, Jolie Jensen, John Fisk, Constance Penley in 1990s have been modified to incorporate this new significant media phenomenon. Lucy Bennett critically reflects on the study of fan phenomenon addressed in Textual Poachers in the context of technological and social media developments, assessing the extent to which fandom studies have progressed 2 decades later. Bennett argues that technological advances have influenced and shaped 4 critical aspects within fan studies that are often interrelated: communication, creativity, knowledge, organizational and civic power. Bertha Chin makes a step forward on Jenkins' textual poaching, referring to fans' sharing of fanfiction as textual gifters. Chin suggests that there is also a hierarchy in fandom, whereby some fans will become subcultural celebrities in their fandom communities because they have more widely spread and more widely acclaimed fanfictions than to receive constantly data for their work. as well as build a strong influence in the particular fandom. Especially in the 2020s, when almost every internet platform competes for subscribers, the platforms on which fans share and publish fanfiction and other fan works have become one of the most critical considerations for fans outside their writing. On this premise, Bray Kelly points out that even though fans still create fanfiction from interest and emotion, the interaction and primarily positive feedback they receive from fan readers on digital platforms are equally important, and this influences their fanfiction creations even more. All these arguments suggest that fan activities have entered a new manifestation in the rapidly developing internet platforms era. The choice of platform and its high interactivity have become a central part of creativity, making fanfiction not only about writing and sharing, but also a form of fiction significantly mediated by its internet distribution structures. In this context, female fanfiction writers have used fanfiction and online platforms as sites of feminist expression and resistance to gender oppression, redefining female identity and fostering enthusiastic participation in the fanfiction community. With these considerations in mind, my project will focus on new forms of feminist fanfiction creation and community interaction in the current internet age. It will use Star Wars Fandom for study because the female discourse and feminist subcultural preference shown by these female participants when facing storytelling dominated by patriarchal narratives are unique and worth exploring. My research questions are: how do female spectators as fan writers evaluate the past and modern Star Wars narratives from the perspectives and sensibilities of the contemporaneous era? What kind of satisfaction does fanfiction community provide to female fan writers? How do these female fan writers' gendered interests and social cognition inform their fanfiction works and narratives? To what extent do female spectators create the Star Wars fanfiction work derived from the original narratives and the fandom community? What implications do fanfiction activities have for an increasingly globalized popular media culture and the contemporary social media environment? This study's theory and arguments builds on the critical challenge of what Alan Kirby proposed about pseudo-modernist digital content in the 21st century, serving commercial profitability rather than artistic merit. Kirby argues that in the era of postmodernism, which fetishizes the author, is already behind us and has been replaced by pseudo-modernism, which fetishizes the reception of the text. The emergence of the internet brought the phenomenon of pseudo-modernist culture to a new level, as the receptance of the text, the readers and viewers became a significant contributing component of the pseudo-modernist cultural product. According to Kirby, such cultural products characterized by pseudo-modernism are binary and dual due to the excessive participation and interaction of the audience, which restricts the content to serve its audience but lacks of depth. These productions are often commercially successful by focusing on entertainment and instant appeal to patter to a broad public tastes and consumer needs broadly and uncritically. As a result, there is a strong link between pseudo-modernist cultural productions and commercial value, with the commercial success of productions often seen as a measure of their value rather than their contribution to culture and ideology. Fanfiction arguably belongs to what Kirby calls pseudo-modernist cultural products, but it is a highly reader participatory, digital and fragmented text. However, I will argue that fanfiction is not just superficial amateur fiction which will be forgotten quickly, but a particular category that reflects the female spectator's feminist discourse and the social merit through the non-profit gift culture. So in order to answer these research questions, I will conduct interviews with female Star Wars fanfiction writers. Afterwards, I will use textual and discourse analysis to provide a comprehensive and critical analysis of the interviews and the Star Wars fanfictions they wrote. In the previous fandom studies by Jenkins and so on, they offered or assumed that female fanfiction writers are straight, middle-class white women. But when going to the 2020s, the fandom becomes a more diverse group. So in selecting the research participants, I will refer to the results of Bray Kelly's survey in 2021 that are fan writers really all straight middle-class white women? The results shows that 63% of online fan writers are white and mostly live in the US and the UK. 87% of them prefer to write fanfiction in English, and 95% of them prefer to read in English. For their gender identity and sexuality, the survey shows that around 71% of online fan writers identify as cisgender women, but 80% of them identify themselves as queer, with 44% as bisexual or pansexual. Although Kelly's survey has its limits, like most of the participants are from US and UK, however, according to this survey, I could see today's fandom studies are never quite the same as the studies in the 1990s, with more queer and non-binary fans joining fandoms, and fanfictions are not only the way to show their feminist ideologies, but also to express queer desires. So for my findings, I will introduce the notion of substitution creation to adequately contextualize, understand, and further theorize the new fanfiction activities among female fans. In this stage, I will define substitution creation as fanfiction that is no longer just about rereading, rewriting, and sharing, but a combination of narratives, including gender and sexual identity, highly interactive within the community, the impact of online subcultural hierarchies, and the continued love of the original narratives expressed through the form of fanfiction creation. Henry Jenkins' textual poetry marks a milestone in the history of fandom studies, and it will be one of the theoretical supports in my project. And the new theory of substitution creation concludes contemporary fanfiction activities among female fans. It will add a new category for Jenkins' list of 10 ways to rewrite a television show to evaluate how the complex relationship between the original narratives, fandom communities, fan hierarchies, gender, and mass media influences the fanfiction creations of female fans with a perspective more relevant to the current era. Okay, that's all of my presentation. If you have any questions, please ask me later or email me. Thank you all for listening, and may the force be with you.
Thank you, Xiyuan, for this very interesting presentation. I'm sure there will be lots of comments and questions for you from the panel and the attendees. So I will now ask our discussant, Dr. Diane Levine, to offer some comments and thoughts.
Thanks very much. Can I just check people can hear me, because I've been having problems with my speaker today. Everything all right? Great.
Yes.
Okay. Fantastic. Okay, well, thank you so much for that talk, Xiyuan. It was really, really interesting, and obviously great to see you thinking about theory at this super early stage of your PhD. You're obviously very committed and very diligent. Your slides and your talk today have made me reflect a little on aspects of cultural production. In 4 areas specifically. I'm going to touch on each of them here, but it would be really great to obviously hear your thoughts on any of these topics, and perhaps they provide you with some touch points that you can consider as you go into the next stage of your data gathering. The first thing it made me reflect on was ideas around cultural specificity, because this is a global South network. Obviously, these are the kinds of things that we talk about quite a lot. So perhaps this is coming at your PhD from a slightly unusual point. And as you pointed out quite early in your talk, mythologies are obviously very deeply rooted in specific cultural contexts, and their meanings and their significance are very closely tied to the values and the beliefs and the histories of the cultures from which they originate. So obviously treating them as universal overlooks kind of cultural specificity and can lead to misinterpretations or oversimplifications of their meanings. And for that reason, you have moved a little away from mythologies, and I think you've done that very sensibly, and you provided a really good link away from mythologies and away from ideas of too much universality. And I think that's very wise, but I still think thinking about cultural specificity and the way that you orient a cultural product in a specific context will be worth considering. The second thing that sprang to mind as I was thinking about your work was around, and again, perhaps unsurprising given this is a global South network, ethnocentrism and kind of reductionism. Because Star Wars is so embedded in global North cultures, perhaps that's a misconception on my part. That's something I have assumed, but perhaps there's great research to show that actually Star Wars is super embedded globally, and that does reduce somewhat the risk of ethnocentric bias. But the idea that cultural products are universal does potentially marginalize other, for example, science fiction feminist traditions that you might want to be considering. The third thing that sprang to mind relates to the nature of the cultural product that you're thinking about, that you're considering. And particularly, and maybe this is again because I come from a bit more of a kind of a socio-psychological space, the static versus the dynamic. So obviously static cultural products would be those that remain relatively unchanged over time. They kind of preserve their original form, their meaning, their function. I don't know, classical works of literature or music or ancient artifacts, and those products are kind of enduring symbols of a culture's heritage and a culture's identity. Whereas in contrast, dynamic cultural products evolve, they adapt to changing contexts, to changing influences, and one might argue that fan fiction is a perfect example of a dynamic cultural product. So while you have the sort of static products offering these senses of continuity, of historical rootedness, the dynamic cultural product reflects the fluidity, the ever-changing nature of the culture that you're reflecting on. And I think both types of cultural products are really going to be quite essential for understanding the richness and the complexity of the kinds of cultural expression that you are exploring. So again, I'm kind of coming from a slightly weird place. My first degree was in music, so my understanding of culture is coming from that kind of perspective, but it would be interesting to kind of have a little bit more thought around the static versus the dynamic cultural product, given the fan fiction focus that you have. And the last thing that I really wanted to just sort of hear more thoughts were variations in the theme of feminist interpretation. So it would be really good as you progress to kind of create a nuanced understanding and reflection of the many flavors of feminism and how these orient to your study. Just as an example, some recent work completed by my PhD student who just passed her Ivy yesterday, hooray, well done Hafsa, in my group, looked at Black feminist theory originally, but then just found it just did not interface well with a context that actually ended up requiring an Islamic feminist orientation. And even attempts to make feminism more neutral, we're doing quite a lot of work on data feminism at the moment as a subfield, which is a new subfield, very promising. Even those attempts at neutrality still end up highlighting differences between feminist interpretations. So I think it's easy to fall into habits of speaking about things like hierarchy and patriarchy, etc., without understanding that those terms are very nuanced and have become increasingly nuanced and maybe fractured over the last 10 years, and maybe that's not a bad thing. So I think it'd be really good to reflect a little bit more on variations of feminist interpretation on your PhD. So as you move forward, obviously some thoughts that I've offered on the core, this core idea that you have of cultural product might be worth considering in relation to these 4 points that I've made. But overall, I think it sounds like you've got an absolutely fascinating study. You're super on top of the topic, and you obviously care enormously about it. So best of luck, and thank you very much.
Okay, thank you. Thank you for Diane. Thank you for your mindful advices. Actually, you mentioned these four aspects is partly I'm working on these days, and especially about the I'm recently focused on the transnational fandom, because there are some fan subs like some fan groups, they make subtitles and translating them to the another cultural identities the fans have. So I'm just considering about maybe when I meet my participants, maybe they have some different cultural backgrounds, and they meet some the original artworks with the different language, but watch them through the fan subs. So that's part of my thinking when working on my project. But finally, thank you.
I mean, I absolutely love that idea. Sorry, I'll be super quick now, and I know I get very excited about what these students are doing. I think it's fantastic. It might be worth maybe thinking about offering them a global map early on in your conversation, your interview with them, and actually saying, where do you feel like could be home? Because they may be from, I don't know, Kenya or the US or whatever. But they may feel like more than one place could be home for them. Particularly, I mean, I'm a diasporic person, multiple places on that map would be identified for me. So it might be worth actually asking them, just questioning the immediate perception that one has of your cultural orientation early on in the interview. And that might give you a sort of slightly different insight and might spark some slightly unusual conversation about the kinds of cultural orientations your participants have. But yeah, fascinating.
Okay, thank you. I will consider about that. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Diane, for your very thoughtful comments. And by the way, thank you both for excellent timekeeping as well. So now I'm going to ask Ruijue. Would you like to add your comments, Ruijue?
Yeah, sure. Can everyone hear me right now?
Yes.
Yeah, I'm so sorry. I need to apologize first because my bad internet connect, so I just cannot turn off my camera. So sorry about that. But for this presentation, I want to say that thank you so much, and I think it is very interesting research topic, because before this presentation, I'm not very familiar with the Star Wars, but after listening to this, I have a general knowledge or understanding of the Star Wars, and maybe it's just got me interested in it. Maybe I just want to find and search the Star Wars, maybe just watch them this evening. And for the presentation, I think the current methodology, such as interview, textual analysis, looks great and suitable for the research. And during your presentation and the chart present in the PowerPoint, I can see the link between the methodology and the new theory you find. And moreover, the new theory present take into account current events that are highly discussed in the society, like the gender equality or sex identity, something like that. And in my opinion, the introduction of the new theory of rewriting the TV series or films is a great contribution to the research area. And because I'm just studying law, so I'm not have much knowledge about the film study. So I'm just going to make a very small suggestion, but if I'm wrong, just ignore it. So for the term of methodology, I feel that it's a little bit narrow to only analyze the Star Wars. Maybe in my opinion, maybe just add another like the film or case study to just support or just make some evidence or compare with the Star Wars. I think it's more better for the research. Yeah, that's all I want to add for the comments. Thank you so much.
Okay, thank you so much for Ruijue, and your suggestion is very mindful. And I did do some comparison between the Star Wars and other films, but it's also on progress. And In case you are a law student, I would like to share that in fandom studies, there is a mainstream aspect of the copyright issue of fan fictions, because they use they just like textual poaching. They use the original narratives and the characters to write another story and publish just online for everyone to read. So the copyright issue in the fan fiction and also fan works, fan paintings, fan music, and fan videos is very worth exploring, because there is no protocols for it. So maybe law students will be interested in this. Okay, thank you for your comment.
Thank you.
Yeah. I repeat Xiyuan's thanks. Thank you, Ruijue, for your contribution. Now we're going to move on to the Q&A part of the seminar. If you have a question, please either type your question or raise your hand and unmute yourself to ask your question verbally. No questions so far. Okay, Nauman.
I think I didn't want to, exercise my discretion as an organizer, so that's why I just want to wait. If anyone else doesn't have any question, then I'm going to raise the question. So Xiyuan, thank you very much for such a fantastic presentation. I think this is something new for me. It's not completely new, but the big picture is clear. And I think given that you are a first year PhD student, it's remarkable that a lot of things are very, very clear. The structure, your understanding of methodology, what to do, how to do, and how put all these things together. That's quite clear, and that's something you should be very happy about. I think when you were discussing all these things, the general importance. This is something I want to clarify, especially for us and the people from law background. The characters, the games, Star Wars or myths, fiction, it has a lot to do with how we look at the world and how we look at ourselves, the overall national identity, because after all, it creates your understanding of who are your heroes and who are your villains in your life. I think that has a huge impact on our differences and similarities. And I think the cultural product thesis, I remember the first time I read was when I was reading the theory of culture wars back in late 1990s. It was created and it gained a lot of attention. And I think a tiny little part of that thesis was about the cultural products, that how the different cultures, they produce things and then they try to influence other cultures in a negative or positive way. So probably you might, at some point you might, in your general importance section of your research, you might want to shed some light on that, at how it is just to engage with the general audience. My only question is about the methodology section. I think you did mention white middle-class women. And I think this is the concept which I focused on, the middle-class role and this understanding how it is fluid, how it varies from one country to another. I just want to, bit curious, I just wondered that how do you see at the middle class, in what context? I mean, what is your understanding of middle class, and especially when it comes to white woman middle class, because a lot of intersectionality is there. How do you see that? That is one question. And the second one is about, when you say you will conduct interviews with the writers. Is it so? I mean, I can see that connection, between the methodology, the tool, and the research questions, how you're going to answer that. But I just wonder, most of the time we have different ways of doing the same thing. So how you're going to justify that this way of conducting interview is the best way among all other available methods? So yeah, that's 2 questions.
Okay.
That's it.
Okay.
That's it. Yeah.
Thanks for Newman. And for my methodology about the participants, most of this I read from the previous literatures and by Henry Jenkins and so on. But about the middle class, I could define it with another literature I read is about the women who can use the internet, who can at least read and write from English by English, and they mostly are well educated. So that's my understanding of the middle class women. And for the interview, actually, I'm still on my way to designing my interview. And to be honest, I haven't started so much on designing my interviews. So I was thinking about designing my interview from my research questions, to ask them questions around my favorite research questions, and also the way to build my new theory. This is my thinking about that because I'm still on my way. Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Nalan, for this question. Karen. Oh, Karen, can you unmute yourself?
That's a classic mistake, isn't it? So are you envisaging a kind of a thematic analysis, but based on the themes that come out as part of your interviewing process? Or are you going to go in with those predetermined sort of themes, which to an extent you will have, because you are focusing on the feminist side of things? I left a comment earlier about wouldn't it be great to go back in time where my brother and I went in to watch Return of the Jedi or The Empire Strikes Back. I don't want to age myself too much, but did we get different things out of it? Well, what was that? It's certainly something I'd be asking him, actually. Just for curiosity's sake, because what you see as neutral, of course, isn't so. My other point was just on sort of, I guess, beautification. As that child, you always wanted to be Princess Leia. You always wanted to be, I've got my hair in multiple different ways and trying that. But your fandom, your herodom is, I think that's going to need a little bit of push as well, I think. I don't know as well the extent to which it differs culturally, for example. I mean, that's just something to explore, perhaps. And the idea of the saviour, the traditional. If I contrast it, say, to something like The Handmaid's Tale, you've got a completely different. I just wondered if there was a comparator you had in mind, or because that might be something to add to it. Not that it doesn't sound like you've got enough to write about already, so you can completely disregard that if you want to.
Okay, actually, I am doing my project with the transcultural scenes, because for me, I watched Star Wars firstly when I was 15. The very first film for me is A New Hope. But actually, when Star Wars came into China, officially came into China is in 1999 about the Phantom Menace. Is the first film of the prequel trilogy. But in 1999, I'm only 1 year old. I can't watch Star Wars in 1 year old. So when I was a teenager, I actually watched Star Wars and become a fan. And also I grew up with some thoughts as a Chinese girl, now a Chinese woman, compared to the mainstream Star Wars culture, which is the white male in America or in Western country. So sometimes I was thinking, I do this project, how I compared with them. So sometimes when my writing, I will consider about how can I add my gender and ethnic special into my writing. So that maybe I will get in touch with some Chinese fan fiction writers who write Star Wars and hear what they thought about this question. And that's part of my thought. Thank you, Karen.
Thanks, Karen. I don't see any hands up or any further questions, but I might just take advantage of my chair position to finish with a question. So this is all fascinating work, Xiyuan, and you mentioned that the female fan fiction communities are excluded from the mainstream fan communities, and I wonder if you could tell us about what kind of digital platforms they usually are networked through. Are these mainstream social networks like, you know, Facebook, TikTok, etc., or other kinds of platforms?
Okay, for the platforms, they will use a mainstream platform like Twitter, now the X, or the Tumblr, just like that. But when they officially post their fan fiction, the long fan fiction words, they will post on archive of our own, the fan-based, fan-organized platform for fans, not organized by some company. So that's the platform they use. And nowadays, I read and I experienced that most of the fans using English, reading and writing English, they will use the archive of our own to read the fan fiction, to reach out to the fan fictions. And in the earliest days, there are other platforms like fanfiction.net and LiveJournal. Yeah, but for now, they mostly use archive of our own. But on X or Tumblr, they just interact with each other. Yeah.
Okay, thank you, Xiyuan. So since there are no questions and we're coming to the end of the time that we have got, so I will thank Xiyuan, Diane, and Ruijue for your contributions and for your presentations, and thanks to all of you for attending. Just to just a quick reminder, next week at the same time, Samuel Gonzalez Catalano, a juridical sciences doctorate candidate from Yale Law School, will be presenting their project titled Beyond Human Rights Protection, an exploration of the writ of amparo as an accountability mechanism in Latin America. Please consider coming along, and thanks again, Xiyuan, for this fantastic presentation.